Let's talk herd. Hi, Angela.
Hi, Camille.
Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's great. So, I thought we could just start by talking about what's really inspiring you at the moment with what you're doing with horses. Is there anything in particular that's really happening for you?
Actually, there is, yeah. I'm just in the process of putting together a new study program.
Oh, wow.
For women, and we're going to be looking at, it's not really about direct interactions with horses. There might be some observation work that we do, but it's mainly going to be study based and really looking at the kind of archetypal, spiritual, and as well as the kind of psychological development aspect of horses, both in this realm and in the archetypal and spirit realm. So that's where I am at the moment, and it feels really nice and exciting.
Wow. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I haven't really done anything like this before.
Is it a course that you've written?
Yes. It's still in the process of writing it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It brings in some of the Aponequest stuff, some of Linda Kahanov's stuff, and the work that I'm trained in, and then I'm bringing in my other sort of areas of passion and expertise, which is Jungian depth psychology and working with myths and dreams and archetypes and symbols, and then my other passion, which is around working with the body. So I'm bringing in different bits and pieces of somatic work and breath work and heart math. So I'm kind of blending everything together, and some of it's new material for me to deliver, which feels, that's what's making it feel really exciting, rather than kind of repeating what I've already done in the past. So, and I'm running it locally, which is also nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a real physical course.
Yes, I'm done with the online working. I mean, I do work online with people, but I'm just chomping at the bit, shall we say, to get back in the room with a group and to kind of go deep and just have that physical, that physical connection as a group of people again after COVID and everything. But then also to connect with nature and the horses from a bit of a distance. So
will you take the group to the horses?
The place where I'm going to run it, there are horses on site. They're not therapeutic horses. They're traditional working competing horses, but they'll be there. So we'll do our stuff, and then we'll go out and observe and just kind of work through the body and the breath and see how the horses respond to that. So it's all new. But I enjoy that. I enjoy trying new things. So
that's a really interesting point that you made there. Difference between therapeutic horses and competition horses. And I totally get that from my experience, but how would you say from your experience what's the difference between those horses?
Well, they're used to what they do, day in, week out. So they know what their job is, and that's kind of all that they know, really. But I have had experiences where, particularly in my early days, I worked on different yards, and there were some horses that absolutely showed an interest in this kind of work. And so I'd work mostly with them. But then there were one or two others who were one was a top level dressage horse, but the moment I stepped on the yard and started doing this work, he was there. He was like, I can't wait for this because it's so completely different. It's such a completely different way of being in the same space as them, approaching them, listening to them. I mean, some horses they aren't going to be able to engage because they're so kind of switched on to the lifestyle that they're in. But my experience has mostly been that a lot of horses it's like their ears prick up, their eyes brighten, and they just they really enjoy it because it's a really nice change of pace for them. and they get to kind of relax a little bit too. Even if we're not directly, working with them, just being in the vicinity, because everything's so calm and present and mindful. They of course they love that, and so it gives them a bit of a breather and a chance to release, anything they're holding on to as well.
That reminds me of a clinic that I did once in California, and we were going. The arena was in the middle of all the. They weren't stables, but they're like open kind of pens that there were horses in, and they weren't part of the clinic, those horses.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I can't remember how many days, it was maybe 2 or 3 days that we were doing. And we were doing, at the time, it was more riding lessons than maybe what I would do now, but it was still quite, open-minded. And by the end, by the last day, I remember the horses in the pens on the outside, they'd been quite switched off and, a little bit shut down, because I'd walked around to see them and I felt quite sad about how they were, because a lot of them weren't visited very often and they were, a little bit forgotten. And it's like they woke up as kind of en masse. Like the last day, they just all started neighing and whinnying, and it was like crazy. It was like, oh my God, they're just coming alive. And it was quite profound experience, really.
My sense is that, because I've worked on lots of different, facilities, and with a wide range of horses and things that they're doing that aren't necessarily, doing this kind of work regularly. And my sense is that there is this, it's like they're sort of waiting for it, and the moment it's there and they realise that they're free to partake of it, they lap it up. And get a lot out of it. It's a real collective thread that's there for me amongst all horses, no matter what they're doing and what their circumstances. And I've experienced this so many times now, where you start doing things in a different way, in a much more present, mindful and respectful way, and they really really appreciate it. It's tough because you've got to leave, and you leave them in the situation they're in, but I still feel that, particularly because they live in the present moment, that still is hugely valuable to them, and they get something out of it. It's almost like it's a bit of a sort of moment of healing, and then they can cope a little bit easier with their daily life.
And I'm sure it changes the energy of the place as well for the people who are there, because I suppose we are similar to horses in that we can become more, and we do become more awakened by what happens, to us and around us. And so what would you say, because there's some people who say that this work with therapy horses, and there's kind of two aspects of this question. There's some people who say that the horses are, that they're not always therapy horses, and they have a lot of burden put on them. And then the other aspect of it is that sometimes it's done in a way that's not very enlightened, for want of a better word. It's not very conscientious. So have you come across that, or do you think that that's overstated, or because there's always going to be people that are against new things?
I've definitely come across it, and right from day one. That you're right. There are some people who are dead against it, and I've explored this an awful lot. And it was kind of one of the reasons why I wrote my book a number of years ago, because I was definitely seeing examples of the horses not really being treated, not treated badly, but just not being respected and engaged with in a way that was really fulfilling to them, and also meant that there was no burden put on them and no stress. That was why I was prompted to write my book, because my experience up until that point had been to work in such a way that was completely different and to what I was seeing, and never really, apart from a couple of times, really came across an issue of a horse feeling or looking and seeming like that they weren't they weren't enjoying it, they weren't happy. I think it's easy for that to get overstated, definitely, and there's an awful lot of good work being done out there, and I think the conversation has shifted in recent years about the role of the horses, the welfare of the horses, their health, their well-being, and their happiness in the work as well. And it's kind of funny because I can even remember my very first experience, which was a workshop even before I'd started my training, and the horses, it just depends on how you do it, and so long as the horses are asked and that the horses are happy themselves. I can remember the first time we went out, and the woman whose place it was, she just went to the gate and called the horses and they came running, all of them, and they were like standing at the gate, let's get going. It's just, and that had been my experience as well with my own horses. They were really eager to work, really happy to. But it's how you set it up, it's how you approach it, it's how you look after them day to day, and it's really about how much you listen to them. And you don't always get it right. Sometimes you don't see something, or sometimes you see something and you're kind of, your ego and persona take over, and you think, well, I'll just override that a bit because I don't want to not give the client a great experience. And I think there's an awful lot of that sort of thing that does go on, whereas actually in that moment it might be better to back off, do some work with the person, let the horse just go and do what they want.
Something I've noticed that happens is that everything is involved in a session, like even what the horse, the way that the herd behaves, like if they want to go away and even come back, or if there's space between us, like they want to be quite far away, or or even distractions like hunting or storms or weather. It's all part of the situation. So I've kind of learned to be accepting of that and almost welcome anything that happens. Is that something you've noticed?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you're outside in weather and you're in the horse's environment, so absolutely everything becomes part of the session. And you work with that, and that's the beauty of it. I find that you're much more in the present moment, and you're in your body and you're feeling and noticing everything, including what's going on with us, the environment, but and the horses too, and how they react to everything. So I mean, I approach sessions with a very very, very, very open agenda. There is no agenda really. It's what the client brings, and it's what the horses do in response to what that client is bringing, and like you say, the conditions of the day too. So we just kind of throw ourselves in and see what's going to happen.
So would you, the negativity that arises sometimes in this form of therapy, would you say that comes more from the source of it, like the training, the particular training courses that are available, and what they call themselves? Or would you say it's more individual implementation?
I think it's probably both, but obviously the training providers have a huge responsibility to train and emulate how you go about both working with the horses and setting up and running the sessions. I work with a lot of practitioners who've trained in other modalities to the one I'm trained in, other approaches, and something that I tend to notice with the other training programs, or some of them, is that there seems to be a bit more of a rigid kind of way of working, more prescriptive, and sessions have to have an outline and goals and certain number of sessions and all those kinds of things. And for certain clients, those things can be really, really useful and sometimes really essential if they need an awful lot of support and structure. But I think what tends to happen then is newly qualified practitioners, and actually even people who've been qualified for a while, will come and work with me, because they get stuck and struggle to kind of be in that. What I was describing was to be really in the flow of what is coming up. And I think that's a human tendency. You know, our ego likes to know what's going to happen, tries to be in control, and tries to, you know, kind of run things. But we are working with both, you know, another person or a group of people who are bringing a whole range of stuff, but then we're working with a completely different species as well, who's going to bring things in a very, very different way. And if we're not able to just kind of flex and flow with that, then we can get a bit stuck, and then it doesn't tend to go quite as well for the client. They can feel a little bit overly like micromanaged, and then also the same for the horses too. And it's all, it's like this kind of triad going on. So if you don't, you know, you don't quite tune into everything that's going on, you can, you know, create issues for the client and the horses, and everything kind of feeds off each other.
So have you changed? What's your evolution been over the years with how you approach this kind of therapy?
Oh yeah, gosh, I've evolved hugely, I think. Like anyone, you know, you finish your training and, you know, you're so immersed in the approach and the teachings that you've just been, you know, completely involved in. So yeah, I suppose my first few years, I was very much teaching and practicing exactly how I'd been trained. But I mean, the minute you open your doors, the minute you start working with clients, you start having to, you know, adapt and flex and change and flow. And I do remember, I was running workshops quite a lot, group workshops, and we had a very kind of standardized format, and it worked really, really well. But I can remember getting to a point where it was like, oh, I've enough now, enough of the agenda, enough of going over the same things in exactly the same way. And I remember sort of not throwing the agenda out, but, you know, starting to just run the whole thing in a much more open, flexible way, to really let whatever was going to come up on the day come up, still keeping the framework, but just really, you know, flexing with whatever was going on with the participants and with them and the horses. And now, I mean, yeah, over the years, because it's been quite a long time now, yeah, I've gone like, yeah, just find my own way, really. You know, that the training that I had is always there. It's the underpinning, but it's my own life experiences, my own experience of therapy myself, my own further training and studies and education that I've done, that, you know, all come in and help support my clients. But really, as I've been describing throughout, you know, now my sessions are very much just about what is going on in the moment, and working with the horses in a way which is, you know, completely open and respectful of them, so that they can bring, you know, whatever it is that they want to bring, so that there's no restrictions on them as far as possible. And to make the sessions so that it's just let's explore, let's see what's going to happen. And I really, really enjoy working like that. And I love seeing the horses just, you know, bring in stuff that I could never have anticipated or thought of, and for the client too. But it's back to a bit what we were talking about before with you know, people with other trainings or perhaps not quite the confidence to stay that present and that grounded, and that's required me to do an awful lot of work on myself. So I do an awful lot of therapy and body work, so that I can be that sort of rooted, solid presence for the client and for the horses as well. I
want to ask you, you know, how you would describe one of your sessions now, and does that involve interpretation of almost communicating with the horses? I mean, obviously it does. How would you say that you do that?
it's a combination of absolutely watching them the whole time. So having one bit of one eye out on the horses right from the very beginning of the session, whether it's an individual or a group. So I'm watching the horses as much as possible all of the time. And then in conjunction with that, I'm a highly intuitive person. Intuition is my main kind of type of way of going through the world. So I'm all the time kind of feeling into, things that intuitive hunches that I might get in my body or in my, just my mind,
right,
that's coming from the horses and that I'm sensing might be going on with them. And then also like just really, really feeling it too. So on a sort of sensory level, really feeling in my body the shifts, the very, very subtle shifts in energy that's going on between me and the client, but also with the horses as well. So there's a whole range of ways that I'm trying to understand what the horses are trying to convey. And I always, again, do it in a very fluid way. So I never say to the client, the horse is, 100% that's what the horse means when they're doing that. I don't think we can ever do that. But we can be, fairly certain about very clear things. Like, for example, if a horse pins their ears, that's often, there's usually one or two explanations for that. So it's a combination of all those things. And again, that's evolved over the years, you get better and better at it. Becomes more subtle, more refined.
So if you had somebody come to you and wanted to work on something, they would tell you what their issue was, or how does it actually work? Like, do you exercises with the horses, or is it more an exchange of energy?
So right from the very beginning with a new client, we'll have an initial conversation. They'll also send me some answers to some written questions so I can get some background and feel for what it is why they want to come and do, this work with me, and horses in particular. So I've already done that sort of exploration, and that might also involve a phone call as well to just make sure, that we're on the right track. And then it's very much, they'll come for the first session, and we'll start off by talking much more and in more detail and more depth. And then we'll go from there, really. And the exercises, any exercises that we might do with the horses will come, like at the beginning of each session, they will come out of that initial conversation at the beginning of each session, because I like to spend some time talking first with the clients so that they can kind of have a bit of a catharsis, get some stuff off their chest, and let's really sort of work out what's going on in that. Because often people say, I want to work on this, I want to focus on this, but actually when they turn up, something else is going on, something else is pressing and coming to the surface first. And then again, when we eventually, go and meet with the horses, then the horses will identify or suggest other things that might be going on. So it's very, very fluid. And then the type of exercises or session that we might do will just come out of that. And some of the time it will be just a very reflective feeling, sensing, making a connection with the horse and exploring that. And other times it might be a little bit more active. And again, the horses will change that. So they might suddenly start working on the person's boundaries, and then that becomes the theme of that session. So it's, very much, again, in the moment.
What kind of things do you do, like, in terms of exercises? Like, would you do things like asking the horse to yield, or inviting the horse into your space, or what kind of things does it involve?
I mean, I do a very, very minimal amount of horsemanship. And that is one of the things that's really evolved for me too. I do far less sort of what you might call active active round pen work or loose round pen work. So getting the horses to move. I have found, and this has been one of the key things that has evolved for me, that it's much, much more about the actual, the exploring the connection and the relationship in a non-active way that tends to be the most thing that most people need. And it also seems to be, for me, coming from the horses, that they will sort of indicate that they'd much rather do that than be asked to move around or asked to yield or so on.
Yeah.
But, you know, like I said before, it just depends in the moment, because the horse will suddenly, you know, they will be sensing absolutely what's going on in the person. So if the thing around personal space comes up, then yeah, we might spend some time playing with that a bit with the horse, and you know, asking the horse to move away, or inviting the horse into your space, but then still keeping the boundary as well. And boundaries tends to be a theme for every single client I work with. I tend to work with, I just work with women, and I can't think of a single client where it hasn't come up, and it tends to come up very, very regularly.
That's interesting.
So yeah, a range of different things. Yeah. And we'll explore the relationship and the connection. So something like, for example, something simple like grooming, you know, it's about the relationship and the connection, and that can be a really lovely way to explore that without it being about, you know, grooming the horse, about it being a task, something to be done. But rather it's an exchange, it's an interaction, it's a real proper relationship, it's a back and forth, you know. This is what the client says, this is what the horse says, and moving through all of that, rather than and the task is very secondary then.
So would you say you have more clients who are non-horse people than actual horse people?
No, they tend to be horsey in some form. I would say the majority of my clients have a background with horses, but very varied. And there does tend to be a bit of a theme of, you know, having had horses or been around horses a lot as a child, then having a gap and maybe coming back to horses. And it seems for a lot of women that horses hold a very, very important, special place for them. And they keep drawing them back. And the other theme that tends to come up is that they've had a bad experience with a horse, maybe a riding accident or a sudden loss of a really, really beloved horse, and that has, you know, changed everything for them. And then they want to come back and try and reconnect. And so we will work through all of that loss and trauma and the fear. You know, there's an awful lot of fear even in horsey people, maybe especially in horsey people.
Yeah. That's true, it is. Would you say that's the number one issue, is kind of nervousness or just fear?
Well, one of the things I noticed was consistent in my early days with the clients I was working with was they would come and say, they'd got certain fears around being around the horses, in you know, manifest in different ways. And almost every single time, if not every single time, we'd start the sessions, and once we started exploring what the fear was, where it was sitting in their body, what it, you know, going deeper into that emotion, it was never about the horses actually. It was always about their background, their history, things that had happened to them, whether as a child or as an adult, and just really just, you know, and I can include myself in this, you know, just a real fear of life, a fear of being able to cope with life, and you know, at the same time a fear around being vulnerable, and feeling safe to be vulnerable around another person. And it was always those kinds of things that would come out, not actually fear of the horses in a sort of literal physical sense. But as you know, the horses are so big that they bring up fear in us very, very easily and very quickly. But my experience has been, it's always been about something else.